Quan Tayrock did not call Nadine Belrose into his office to talk. He called her in to perform. There were 7 people already seated when she arrived HR. 2 department heads, a junior associate, who had no reason to be there, except that Tayrock liked an audience. Nadine noticed that immediately. She noticed everything. That was always her problem and her gift. "We're restructuring the division," Tayrock said, without looking up from the paper in front of him. Nadine waited. "Your position is being eliminated." He slid a manila envelope across the desk, the way someone slides a tip to a valet, casual, dismissive, already thinking about something else. Inside was a termination letter dated 3 days ago. He had written it before the meeting, before whatever conversation they were pretending to have. 11 years. He had made the decision before she walked through the door. "Your replacement starts Monday," he added. Then he looked up. "She's very talented." He was smiling when he said it. If you've ever worked yourself to the bone for people who never once saw your value, if you've ever been replaced by someone half as qualified and twice as young and watched everyone applaud, then stay with us. Because what happens next is not just Nadine's story. It's the story of every person who was ever told they were less than they knew themselves to be. Subscribe to our channel right now and hit that like button before this story is over. Drop your city and country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels, because we are just getting started. Nadine Belrose was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make it function better without anyone noticing she had done anything at all. That was the whole problem. She was 39 years old, a plus-size Black American woman with deep brown skin and natural curls. She twisted back into a loose bun on mornings she was running late, which was most mornings, because she stayed late the night before almost every single day. She had been with Crest Holdings for 11 years, 4 months, and roughly 16 days if anyone had been counting, which nobody was except her. And even she had stopped counting around year 7 when it became clear that tenure wasn't being tracked in the way that mattered. She lived in a modest apartment in Busan's Haeundae district, 22 minutes from the office by subway, when the trains ran on time, 34 when they didn't. She knew which cars to board to get the best seat. She knew which coffee cart vendor near the office entrance made the strongest Americano. She knew the name of every maintenance worker on the building's first 3 floors. She had sent flowers when the overnight security guard's mother passed away, and she had never mentioned it to anyone because it wasn't the kind of thing you mentioned. She was not glamorous. She spilled things. She walked into door frames when her brain was 3 problems ahead of her body, which it usually was. She once upended an entire tray of champagne flutes at the company's annual gala, catching one before it hit the marble floor and missing the other 11 catastrophically. She had apologized to the catering staff, helped them clean up, tipped them out of her own purse, and spent the rest of the evening with a damp stain across her left shoe that she hoped nobody noticed. They noticed. But they noticed the shoes, not the fact that she had spent the first 40 minutes of that same gala quietly identifying a 10-point discrepancy in the hospitality budget report that would have triggered an audit if left unaddressed. She had flagged it in a 3-line email from her phone in the bathroom between the appetizers and the main course. Nobody ever acknowledged the email. The audit never happened. Life went on. That was how Nadine's professional life worked, and had worked for 11 years. She carried Crest Holdings on her back with the quiet, dogged competence of someone who had never once been told directly, clearly, in plain words that they were indispensable. She had been told she was great to have around. She had been told she was a real workhorse. Once at a performance review, her supervisor at the time had called her a team player in the truest sense, which sounded like a compliment until she realized it meant they were giving the credit for her work to the team and the raise to someone else. She built the billing system that processed over $200 million in annual insurance claims across Crest's hospital network. She designed the encrypted compliance protocols that kept the company out of regulatory trouble 4 separate times. She had trained 6 different employees over the years, at least 2 of whom had since been promoted above her, and she had trained them well because she did not know how to do anything halfway. Her direct supervisor for the past 3 years had been Quan Taerock, and Quan Taerock was exactly the type of person who arrived at meetings with the credit for work he had not done and left before the problems he had caused became visible. He was 41, photogenic in the way that reads well in corporate headshots, and he possessed a particular skill that had nothing to do with logistics or medical billing or operational systems. He understood people's vanity. He knew exactly when to compliment the right executive, exactly when to laugh at the right joke, exactly how to frame failure as an unfortunate circumstance rather than the consequence of his specific decisions. He did not understand Nadine's work. Not really. He understood that it ran, and that when it stopped running, people got very upset, and that he should not be anywhere near the room when that happened. Beyond that, the technical details bored him. What did not bore him was ambition. Taerock wanted to modernize the division's image. He had decided somewhere between one aspirational business seminar and the next that modernizing meant replacing the people who built the machinery with people who looked good standing next to it. Younger, more polished, more photographable for the company's annual report. He had found Han Yi Rim at a recruitment firm. She was 28, technically credentialed, sharp in interviews, and eager in the way that new hires are eager before they discover what the job actually involves. She wore structured blazers and carried a leather portfolio and had given a genuinely impressive presentation about digital transformation strategies during her second interview. She had never managed a hospital billing infrastructure. She had never worked with Hanuel Crest's particular constellation of legacy software, international insurance frameworks, and the quiet, undocumented institutional knowledge that kept it all from collapsing into each other. But she had a better title on her previous resume, and she was 12 years younger than Nadine, and Taerock had already decided. The meeting he called was the formality, the documentation he needed, the box he had to check before the box he had already checked 3 days prior. Nadine sat across from him in that conference room with 7 people who had no business being there, and she understood the architecture of the moment before he finished his second sentence. She had spent 11 years reading rooms for a living. She knew what a real conversation looked like, and what a performance looked like, and this was a performance. "Your position is being eliminated," he said. She didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. The letter was already dated. The decision was already made. Arguing would only give him the scene he wanted, the upset employee, the emotional reaction, the story that made the departure feel justified. She signed what she needed to sign. She asked for her final paperwork in writing. She said very little, because there was nothing useful to say. And then she went back to her desk and she began packing. The cardboard box was smaller than she expected it to need to be. 11 years, and it turned out she didn't keep many personal things at work. A framed photo of her mother. A small succulent she'd owned for 6 years named Phyllis because she found it funny to name plants after her mother's bridge club friends. A coffee mug with a hairline crack in the handle that she kept meaning to throw away and never did. She was trying to fit Phyllis securely between the photo and the mug when her hand slipped and the mug went over the side of the desk, hit the floor, and the handle finally broke off completely. From somewhere across the open office floor, she heard someone laugh. Not a startled laugh, not an accident happens laugh. A different kind. She crouched down to pick up the mug. She heard 2 more people laughing now, quietly, the way people laugh when they want to, but think they should be subtle about it. She took her time picking up both pieces. She straightened up. She did not look in the direction of the laughter. She carried the box to the elevator. She pressed the ground floor button. The doors closed. She stood perfectly still for the 12 floors it took to reach the lobby. The taxi was orange. The driver was playing something on a low radio. The back seat smelled like pine air freshener and old vinyl. Nadine put the cardboard box on the seat beside her and gave the driver her address, and then she turned toward the window, and for the first time since Taerock had slid that envelope across the desk, she let herself feel the weight of it. Not because of the job. She understood already, somewhere in the competent and unsentimental part of her brain, that she was better than the job had ever been willing to admit. She felt the weight of something else. 11 years of watching people stand on top of her work and take credit for the view. The tears lasted about 4 blocks. Then she stopped, because she had things to do. Her bills were not going to negotiate themselves. She got home, set the box down by the door, and stood in her kitchen for a long moment, looking at the stack of envelopes on the table. Rent, utilities, the car insurance she kept paying, even though she barely drove the car. Her mother called twice during the next hour, and she let both calls go to voicemail, because if she talked to her mother right now, she was going to cry again, and the time for that had passed. She made coffee. She opened her laptop. She pulled up her resume, which she had not updated in 2 years, and she started reading it with the cold, impartial eye of someone who has just been reminded that her value is something she carries with her, not something other people assign. She rewrote the resume over the course of 4 hours. She did not downplay anything. She did not soften her accomplishments or qualify her expertise or apologize for the scale of what she had actually built and managed and saved. She wrote exactly what she had done. Then she sent it to 4 competitors. She did not expect much. She was being practical. She was covering her bases. She was not in the business of optimistic fantasy. By the following evening, 2 of the 4 had called back. By the 3rd day, she had 3 interviews scheduled and a 4th company asking if she was available for a preliminary conversation. She sat at her kitchen table with her phone and 4 different calendar invitations and the dawning, complicated recognition that she had spent 11 years in a building that treated her like a liability, and there were apparently other buildings that would fight to get her through the door. The feeling it produced was not triumph. Not yet. It was something more disorienting. The specific vertigo of realizing you have been living smaller than you had to. She didn't have time to sit with it long. On the 4th morning after she left Hanuel Crest, her phone rang at 6:47 a.m. With a number she recognized. She let it ring. It rang again at 7. She made coffee first. She drank half of it. She looked at Phyllis, the succulent, now sitting on hers the succulent, where she had placed her the evening she got home. At 7:19, she answered. Nadine. Tayrock's voice had a specific texture she had never heard in 11 years of working for him. Something strained underneath the professional surface. Something he was working very hard to keep out of his tone and failing. How are you? She waited. We've had some complications, he said. She waited. The billing system, there's been an issue. URIM has been working on it, but there are some configurations that seem to be, we're having trouble locating. You fired me 4 days ago, Tayrock. Yes, I understand that. We were hoping, given our working relationship, that you might be willing to. I'm not your employee. A beat of silence. She heard him recalibrate. Of course. We would compensate you for your time, naturally. We thought perhaps a short consulting arrangement. What's down? He paused. She could hear him deciding whether to tell her the truth, which was something he rarely did but occasionally arrived at when the alternative was worse. The hospital claims routing. All of it. International insurance processing is frozen. He exhaled. We have approximately $40 million in suspended transactions, and 3 hospital administrators who are threatening to pull their contracts before the end of the week. Nadine set her coffee mug down. $40 million. Splitting. Not in a single account, spread across the claims network, frozen between systems that couldn't talk to each other because something in the routing logic had been changed without understanding how the routing logic was built. She knew exactly what had happened. She didn't need to see the screens yet. She had warned about this. She had sent an email about this. I'll need my own terms, she said. Of course, whatever you... Let me finish. Her voice cold, not warm. Precise. 3-month consulting agreement. In writing before I walk in the door. Twice my previous salary. Full technical authority over the system. Nobody changes anything without my sign-off. Not Rim, not you, not anyone from your department. Silence. That's Tayrock started. I have 2 other calls this afternoon. Both of them have been very interested. I don't need Hanuel Crest Tayrock. Hanuel Crest needs me. So those are my terms. You have an hour. She hung up. She sat very still for a moment. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted it to. That had been the most direct she had ever spoken to Tayrock in 11 years, and some old ingrained reflex in her wanted to call back and soften it, explain herself, reassure him that she wasn't being difficult. She picked up her coffee mug instead, drank the rest of it. When Tayrock called back 22 minutes later, he said that someone else had reviewed the terms. Someone above him, and they were approved. She asked who approved them. He hesitated. Mr. Seo, he said. Nadine paused. Seo Mujin was not a name that came up often in her direct experience of the company. She knew who he was, the kind of knowing that happens at the periphery of an organization where someone's authority is felt rather than encountered. She had seen him in the building perhaps a dozen times over 11 years. He moved through Haniel Crest like a weather system. Rooms adjusted around him. She had collided with him once. Literally, outside the 18th floor elevator bank, 18 months ago, when she was walking and reading a report simultaneously, which she knew was a bad habit. And she had come around the corner directly into the chest of the tallest and most impeccably composed man she had ever seen in person. 3 folders had gone airborne. She had apologized 5 times in rapid succession while gathering papers from the floor. He had stood watching her with an unreadable expression and said nothing until she accidentally recited a billing reconciliation figure aloud while sorting documents, at which point he had said quietly, "That number is incorrect. It should be 4.72 million, not 4.68. She had stopped, looked at the page. He was right. She had apologized a 6th time. He had walked to the elevator. She had stood in the corridor for a moment, wondering whether that had actually happened. That was the extent of what she knew about Seo Mujin. Apparently, he knew more about her. The following morning, she arrived at Haniel Crest at 8:15. She was wearing the burgundy blazer she wore when she needed to feel capable. She had Phyllis in her bag because she had decided on impulse that the plant was coming back to work with her. Her laptop bag strap caught on the edge of the security gate as she came through. It yanked her sideways. Her notebook fell out of the side pocket and hit the marble floor, and the pages fanned out across 6 feet of lobby tile. She heard someone catch their breath somewhere behind the reception desk. The sound of someone trying not to laugh and not entirely succeeding. Nadine crouched down. She started collecting pages. She was reaching for the last one when another hand reached it first. She looked up. Seo Mujin stood above her, holding the notebook. He was exactly as she remembered, controlled, quiet, a man who gave nothing away in his expression without making a deliberate choice to give it. He looked down at her, kneeling on the lobby floor, surrounded by recovered pages, and said nothing for a moment. Then he held the notebook out. She took it. "Fix my company," he said. She stood up. She met his eyes, which required more nerve than she expected. "Then nobody touches my system." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly. Something adjacent to one. The closest thing she had seen. "Agreed," he said, and he walked toward the elevators. Nadine stood in the lobby for a moment, with her notebook pressed to her chest and the security gate still blinking behind her. Then she straightened her blazer, tucked the notebook under her arm, and walked to the elevator. The work was waiting. She got to her old desk, a different desk now, technically a reassigned one, but in the same cluster, logged into the system with her restored credentials, and started pulling logs. The mess was extensive, not catastrophic yet, but moving in that direction with the efficiency of a slow flood. Insurance claim packets were bouncing between processing nodes because the routing priority table had been rewritten at some point in the past 4 days, and whoever had rewritten it had not understood that the priority table wasn't just a list. It was a conditional logic tree that operated differently for domestic versus international claims, and the new configuration had collapsed that distinction entirely, which meant international packets were hitting domestic endpoints and timing out and going into an error queue that was now approaching capacity. Nadine could see exactly when the change had been made. She could see the timestamp and the user credentials attached to it. Yirim. She sat back for a moment and looked at that. Yirim was sitting 2 desks away, visibly not looking at Nadine, working with the particular focused intensity of someone who was terrified. She was 28 and she had been given a system and she hadn't been trained on and told to manage it. And she had made a change them since in isolation if you didn't know the architecture underneath it. And now $40 million was frozen and 3 hospital contracts were at risk and she was sitting techs away waiting for the world to end. Nadine looked at the timestamp again. Then she kept pulling logs. Because Yi Rim's change wasn't the beginning of this. Yi Rim's change was the point at which something latent became visible. She went back 6 months, and there it was. Buried in a maintenance log from last November, flagged amber by the automated monitoring system and marked as reviewed by Tayrok's department, reviewed and closed. A compatibility issue between the core claims engine and the updated international carrier database. A minor discrepancy in how the two systems handled exception codes. Minor, then. Not minor if left unaddressed. Nadine opened her sent mail archive. She knew what she would find before she found it. She had written the email. She remembered writing it. November 14th, 7:43 in the morning. 3 paragraphs explaining the compatibility risk, the likely failure mode, the recommended fix. She had sent it to Tayrok. He had read it. There was a read receipt. He had not responded. He had not forwarded it. He had not assigned anyone to address it. He had read it and closed the window and moved on to something more immediately useful to Quan Tayrok. Nadine stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and sent a message requesting that CEO Mujin be available for a system briefing within the hour. She went back to work. 93 minutes later, the routing network came back online. She didn't announce it. She watched the first batch of frozen claims begin processing, confirmed the queue was clearing, checked 3 separate validation points to make sure she hadn't fixed one thing by breaking another, and then she sat back and drank the cold remains of a coffee someone had brought her an hour ago that she had completely forgotten about. Across the floor, a junior analyst noticed the status board change. He said something to the person next to him. Word spread the way it always spreads in operations rooms, quietly, then quickly. Tayrok appeared from wherever he had been managing his visibility during the crisis. He looked at Nadine. He looked at the screens. He opened his mouth. Yi Rim changed the routing table, Nadine said, before he could begin. She was working with incomplete information about the system architecture. The root cause was a compatibility issue flagged 6 months ago that wasn't addressed. She looked at him directly. I have documentation. Tayrok went very still. Across the office, Mujin stood near the door watching. He had been there for the last 20 minutes. Most people hadn't noticed him yet. Tayrok had not noticed him at all. That email, Tayrok started, was read on November 14th, Nadine said, at 8:02 From your account. The room had gone quiet, not performance quiet. The real kind, where people stop pretending to work because something is happening that is too significant to look away from. Tayrok looked around the room, registered, too late that he had an audience. Yi Rim changed the system without proper authorizations. Yi Rim made an error, Nadine said. She was never properly trained on this system. She was handed credentials and a login and told to manage infrastructure she had never seen before. That is not her failure. That is a management failure. Yi Rim was very still at her desk. Tayrok's jaw tightened. Regardless of how we got here, the system is back online, Nadine said. I'll send you the full incident report by end of day. She turned back to her screen. Mujin, standing near the door, watched her for another moment. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator. He had 7 phone calls to make and a great deal of reading to do. He was going to go back 11 years and look at every single thing Nadine Belrose had ever done inside his company. And he suspected, before he even started, that he was not going to like what he found. Mujin did not go home that night. His penthouse office on the 43rd floor had a desk that cost more than most people's cars, a view of Busan Harbor that changed color every hour as the light shifted off the water, and a private elevator that opened directly into the room so that nobody saw him come or go unless he wanted them to. He used all 3 of those things between 8 in the evening and 4 in the morning, and by the time the harbor had gone from black to the particular dark gray that comes. Just before dawn, he had read 11 years of personnel files, incident reports, system log, internal memos, and departmental reviews. He read slowly. He was not the kind of man who skimmed. Skimming was for people who were satisfied with the surface of things, and Seo Mu-jin had not built what he built by being satisfied with surfaces. What he found in those files made his jaw tighten in a way it rarely did. Not because the information was complicated, because it wasn't. It was simple. It was so simple it was almost insulting. Nadine Belrose had been carrying this company's operational infrastructure on her back for the better part of a decade, and the company had responded by giving her a mid-range salary, a desk in an open floor plan, and a supervisor who took credit for her work. In quarterly reports that Mu-jin had read and signed off on, without looking closely enough at who actually produced the results. He set down the last file at 4:17 in the morning and sat in his chair looking at the harbor. Then he picked up his phone and sent a message to his head of internal investigations. Not HR, internal investigations. He wanted Kwon Tae-rok's complete professional history on his desk by noon. He set the phone down, picked up the next folder, started reading again. Nadine arrived at 7:40 the following morning with a travel mug she had learned to hold with 2 hands after the incident with the security gate and a printed copy of the incident report she had spent the previous evening writing. The report was 14 pages. It was thorough. It named every contributing factor, every technical failure point, every missed intervention, and every warning that had been issued and ignored, in chronological order with attached documentation for each. She had debated while writing it whether to be blunt about Tae-rok's role or to soften it into the kind of careful corporate language that lets everyone read what they want into a sentence. She had decided not to soften it. She had a consulting agreement. She had technical authority. She was done softening things. She printed 3 copies, one for her own records, one for the executive filing system, and one for whoever asked first. The floor was quieter than usual at 7:40. Yirim was already at her desk, which surprised Nadine. She hadn't expected her in early. She hadn't expected her in at all. Frankly, most people in Yirim's position, staring down an incident of that magnitude, would have called in sick and spent the morning deciding whether to resign. Yirim was sitting at her desk with a straight back and a cup of tea she hadn't touched, staring at her screen with the expression of someone who had made a decision and was waiting to find out whether it was the right one. Nadine sat down at her own desk, logged in, checked the system status still running, claims still processing, queue clearing at a healthy rate. Good. She felt Yirim look at her and look away. Felt it the way you feel someone's attention even when you're not watching them. She didn't acknowledge it. She had work to do. At 8:15, Tae-rok walked in. He was wearing his best suit. The charcoal one that probably cost more than Nadine's monthly rent, pressed to the kind of perfection that takes either a very good dry cleaner or a wife who irons at 6 in the morning. His hair was immaculate. His posture was the posture of a man who had decided overnight on a strategy. He walked directly to Nadine's desk. The incident report, he said. I'll need to review it before it goes to executive level. Nadine looked up from her screen. It's already filed. The skin around his eyes tightened by about 3 millimeters. She had spent 3 years working directly under this man, and she had learned to read the 3-millimeter signals because they were the only ones he ever let through. You filed it without running it through department review. My consulting agreement gives me independent reporting authority on technical incidents. That's in the contract you signed. She held his gaze. The one you signed yesterday. The contract doesn't supersede departmental process. Actually, Nadine said, and she kept her voice completely level. Article 4, subsection 2. Consultant retains independent authority to report technical findings directly to executive leadership without departmental intermediary review. Word for word. She paused. I wrote that clause myself. Tae-rok stood very still for a moment. Around them, the floor was filling up. People arriving, setting bags down, turning on screens. Nobody was looking directly at Tae-rok and Nadine. Everyone was listening. We'll discuss this later, Tayrox said. I'm available at 2, Nadine said and turned back to her screen. He stood there for 2 more seconds. She didn't look up. Then she heard him walk away. She exhaled very slowly through her nose. Her hands were completely steady. She was mildly impressed by her own hands. She heard Yirim make a small sound from 2 desks over. Not a laugh. Something between acknowledgement and disbelief. Nadine did not look over. The meeting at 2 o'clock was in Tayrox's office, which he had clearly arranged to be on his territory and on his terms. He had his deputy, Park Jun-seo, sitting in the corner with a notepad, which was Tayrox's way of creating a witness before he needed one. He had a printed copy of Nadine's incident report on the desk in front of him, with several sections highlighted in yellow. Nadine sat down across from him and put her own copy on the table. Page 4, Tayrox said, without preamble. You attributed the root cause of the system failure to a compatibility warning that was, and I'm quoting you, identified, documented, and submitted to departmental management in November of last year with no subsequent action taken. That's accurate. That is not how I remember the communication. Nadine opened her copy, slid it across the desk. The email was printed on page 7. Attachment included. Read receipt attached. Tayrox looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes. Gone before she could name it. Emails get buried, he said. In a department receiving hundreds of communications per week. Tayrox, her voice was quiet, not aggressive, not apologetic. Just quiet. The email has a read receipt. You opened it at 8:02 on November 14th. You were in the office that morning because you sent 3 other emails between 8 and 9. You read it, you closed it, you moved on. Park Jun-seo's pen had stopped moving. That is your interpretation. That is the data, Nadine said. Tayrox leaned forward. When he did that, when he lowered his voice and leaned in, it usually worked. She had watched it work on people for 3 years. Nadine, we've had a long professional relationship. I'd like to think there's a way we can resolve this that doesn't create unnecessary escalation. She looked at him. What would unnecessary escalation look like? She asked. Revising the incident report's causal attribution. Framing the root cause as a system complexity issue rather than a specific management failure. That kind of language creates a very difficult environment for everyone. For everyone, Nadine said, or for you. Tayrox sat back. I'm not revising the report, Nadine said. It's accurate. It stays as written. She stood up. If you have a factual correction, something in those 14 pages that is demonstrably wrong, send it to me in writing, and I'll review it. Otherwise, the report stands. She picked up her copy. Thank you for the meeting, she said, and walked out. In the corridor, she made it around the first corner, and then stopped, put her hand flat against the wall, and breathed. She was shaking. Not visibly, she checked, but somewhere in her chest, some wire was vibrating at a frequency she could feel, but couldn't see. She had spent 11 years in that building, swallowing things like that conversation. Saying of course and I understand, and I'll look into a different framing, because the alternative felt like a risk she couldn't afford. She wasn't an employee anymore. She was a consultant with a signed contract and technical authority and an email with a read receipt, and she had just said no to Kwon Tae-rok's face and walked out of his office, and the building had not fallen down. She exhaled. Then she straightened up and went back to work. What happened next was not something Nadine anticipated, because she was focused on the billing system and not on the particular ecosystem of Haneul Crest's social architecture, which had its own weather patterns and pressure systems that she had spent 11 years navigating without fully mapping. What happened was Yirim. At 4:30 that afternoon, Yirim appeared at the side of Nadine's desk with specific body language of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say multiple times and is still not confident they're going to get through it. "Do you have a minute?" Yirim said. Nadine looked up. Yirim was 28 and tired in a way that people who have spent 48 hours waiting for consequences get tired of deep, bone-level exhaustion that shows up in the corners of the eyes and the tension in the shoulders and the slightly too careful way she was standing. "Sit down," Nadine said. Yirim sat. There was a pause. "I didn't understand the system," Yirim said. not as an excuse. As a fact she was delivering, because she had decided honesty was the only thing she had left that was worth anything. I know, Nadine said. I changed the routing table because it looked like a simple priority adjustment. The documentation was incomplete, Nadine said. I know that too. I wrote most of it in 2019, and I never got the update finalized because I kept getting pulled onto other fires. She paused. That's not your fault. Yirim looked at her. I laughed when they fired you. The words sat in the air between them for a moment. Nadine looked at her. She had known this. She had heard it from across the floor. She had carried it in the back of her mind like a splinter that doesn't cause constant pain, but that you always know is there. I know, Nadine said. I didn't. I don't have a good excuse for that. No, Nadine agreed. Yirim's jaw worked. I was trying to make a good impression with Tayrok's people. Everyone was laughing. She stopped. That's not an excuse either. No, Nadine said. But it's human. Yirim looked at the desk. I'm telling you, she said, because you're going to be deciding what happens to my position here. And I wanted you to know that I know what I did. Nadine studied her for a moment. The exhaustion. The straight back she was maintaining despite it. The decision she had made to come over here, to say it directly, to not wait and see if it would come up. Go home, Nadine said. Get some sleep. Come back tomorrow at 8, and I'll show you how the routing logic actually works. Yirim stared at her. That's it, Yirim said. That's it. Yirim stood up slowly, like she wasn't sure the ground was going to hold. Why? Nadine turned back to her screen. Because you made a mistake in a system you were never properly trained on. And because you came over here and told me the truth when you didn't have to. She clicked on a log file. I don't throw people away for being human, Yirim. Some people in this building could learn from that. Yirim walked back to her desk. She did not look back. But Nadine noticed, from the corner of her eye, that she sat down differently than she had sat down all day. Less like someone waiting for an execution. More like someone who had been handed an second chance and was trying to figure out what to do with it. The call from Mujin's office came at 5:53 through his executive assistant, formal and brief Mr. CO would like to meet with the consultant at 9 a. Tomorrow in the penthouse office. Nadine wrote it down. Looked at what she had written. Put the notebook away. She stayed until 7, finishing a secondary diagnostic. She had started that afternoon a preventive review of 3 adjacent system components that hadn't been touched during the incident, but that she wanted to check while the logs were fresh. She found 2 minor configuration gaps and corrected them. She documented the corrections. She would add them to a supplemental incident report in the morning. On her way to the elevator, she passed Tayrok's office. The door was closed. The light was on. Through the glass panel, beside the door, she could see him on the phone, standing with his back to the door, one hand pressing the phone to his ear and the other pressed flat against the window. She didn't stop. The morning meeting with Mujin was on the 43rd floor, in a room that was not like any room Nadine had been in before, within the confines of a corporate building. It was large and spare, and exceptionally quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from very good soundproofing and the absence of any decoration that didn't serve a specific purpose. No inspirational posters, no framed mission statements. A desk, a seating arrangement, and a wall of windows facing the harbor. Mujin was already there when she arrived, standing at the windows with his hands behind his back, watching a container ship move slowly across the harbor entrance. He did not turn around when she came in, which meant he was the kind of person who chose deliberately not to acknowledge things rather than the kind of person who missed them. She sat down at the chair closest to the desk. He turned around. The incident report, he said, sitting down across from her. No preamble, no social scaffolding. She appreciated that more than she would have a week ago. Yes, you documented a management failure. I documented what the data showed. Mujin set his copy of the report on the desk. She noticed that sections were marked not highlighted, marked with small, precise handwritten notations in the margins. He had read it carefully, all 14 pages. Tayrok contacted my executive assistant this morning, requesting a meeting to discuss the report's framing, Mujin said. Nadine said nothing. He submitted a written statement arguing that the causal attribution was an overreach of your consulting mandate. He's wrong about the mandate, Nadine said. The contract language is explicit. I know he's wrong about the mandate, Mujin said. That is not why I'm telling you. She looked at him. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the environment you're operating in. He placed one hand flat on the desk, a measured gesture, not aggressive. Taerock has been with this company for 9 years. He has relationships at several levels of this organization. He is not going to accept the findings of that report without a fight, and the fight will be aimed at you rather than at the facts. Nadine absorbed this. Is that a warning? It is information, Mujin said. What you do with it is your decision. She looked at the harbor through the window behind him. A different ship now, or the same one further along. You read the full report, she said. Yes. Including the November email. Yes. And Mujin looked at her steadily. I spent last night reviewing your personnel file and 11 years of system records. He paused. Not for dramatic effect, she could tell the difference. For precision, you prevented 4 separate compliance failures that would have resulted in regulatory investigations. You designed the core billing architecture that the company still runs on. You trained at least 6 employees who are now in positions that depend on the systems you built. He paused again. None of that is in your performance reviews. The room was very quiet. No, Nadine said, it's not. Why? Because the reviews were written by Taerock, she said. And Taerock's reviews reflected what he wanted executive leadership to see, which was his department's performance, not mine. Mujin looked at her for a moment. You knew this. I suspected it. I didn't have the authority to review my own reviews. You could have escalated. To whom? She said. Taerock controlled my access to executive leadership. I submitted everything through him. If I had tried to go around him, she stopped. I needed the job. I have bills. I don't have family money. I made the calculation that keeping the job was worth more than fighting a battle I might lose. She met his eyes. I was wrong about that, but I made the calculation in good faith with the information I had. Mujin was quiet for a long moment. I want to offer you your position back, he said. I won't take it. I know, he said. That's why I have something else. He slid a document across the desk. She looked at it. Executive Director of Systems and Strategic Operations. Her own department. Independent budget. Final approval authority on operational changes. A salary that was almost double what she had been making before she was fired. She looked at the document for a moment without touching it. Why? She said. Mujin looked at her. Because I spent last night reading 11 years of this company's operational history, and I found your fingerprints on every moment it didn't fall apart. And I found nothing with your name on it in the places where the credit was distributed. He paused. I don't run a company that operates that way. Nadine looked at the document. The offer was real. She could see it in the language of the contract, specific, detailed, legally precise in ways that vague gestures of goodwill never were. Someone had actually written this, actually thought through the terms. She thought about the 3 companies that had called her. The interviews she had scheduled and then rescheduled twice because of the crisis at Haniel Crest. The particular complicated feeling of realizing your value exists independently of the organization that underestimated it. She thought about the fact that at 7 in the morning, she had found Yi-Rim already at her desk, with a notebook full of questions about the routing architecture. She had spent 40 minutes answering them before the formal workday had even started. She thought about what it would mean to leave. I need time, she said. How much? 24 hours, Mujin nodded once. She stood up. She gathered her things with the particular careful deliberateness of a woman who has upended enough objects in this building to develop a strategy about it. She was almost at the door when he said, Bell rose. She turned. Taerock is going to escalate this. He has already started. Mujin's voice was even. Informational. He will argue that your incident report was designed to damage his reputation. He will find allies in this building. He will try to reframe the November email as ambiguous. He looked at her. I need you to be prepared for that. Nadine held his gaze. I've been prepared for that for 11 years, she said. She turned around and walked to the elevator. What she did not know, could not have known, standing in that elevator on the way down from the 43rd floor, was that Tae-rock had spent the morning doing exactly what Moojin said he was doing. He had made 4 phone calls before 8 a.m., 2 to long-standing allies in the procurement division, 1 to the head of external relations who had been his racquetball partner for 6 years, and 1 to Park Jun-seo, his deputy, who had been in the room for yesterday's meeting and who understood, from the way Tae-rock said his name, that what was being requested was loyalty. What Tae-rock wanted was simple. He needed people who would speak to the ambiguity of the November email. People who would confirm in conversations, in written statements if necessary, that operational communications at Hanoel Crest were routinely complex and difficult to assess, that a single email about a potential compatibility issue was one of hundreds of such communications, that no reasonable person could be expected to identify and prioritize every technical flag that passed through a department of that size. He needed the narrative to shift from his specific failure to operational complexity. Systemic ambiguity, the kind of broad, shared gray zone that nobody was responsible for, because everyone was responsible. He had done this before, not at this scale, and not with this much documentation working against him. But the mechanics were familiar. He knew which conversations to have and how to have them. What he did not account for was Park Jun-seo. Jun-seo had been his deputy for 3 years. He was 34, careful, politically astute in the particular way that middle management requires. He understood the hierarchy, and he moved within it efficiently, and he had survived by understanding who held real authority at any given moment and positioning himself accordingly. He met with Tae-rock at 10:30. He listened. He nodded at the appropriate intervals. He said he would see what he could do. Then he went back to his desk, and he sat very still for about 4 minutes. He had been in the November conversation. Not the email. He hadn't known about the email until Nadine's report surfaced it. But he had been in a meeting in December, 2 weeks after that email, when Nadine had raised the compatibility issue verbally during a department systems review. He had been in the room. He had watched Tae-rock nod and say they would look into it and then move on to the next agenda item. He had written it down in his meeting notes. He still had those notes. Jun-seo opened his desk drawer. He found the notebook. He turned to December's entries. He looked at what he had written. Then he picked up his phone and called Moojin's executive assistant, Asedize. He said he had information relevant to the current internal review and would like to schedule a meeting at the earliest possible time. The appointment was set for that afternoon. Tae-rock found out at 3:15 when Jun-seo's calendar entry appeared in the department shared system, and someone who owed Tae-rock a favor sent him a message with 3 words. Jun-seo is talking. Tae-rock read the message at his desk. He read it twice. He set the phone face down on the desk and sat very still with his hands flat in front of him. The November email was documented. He had known that since yesterday. He had been managing around it, looking for the soft edges, the places where the language could be reframed. But Jun-seo's meeting notes were different. Jun-seo's meeting notes meant there was a second witness, a second data point, December in addition to November, a verbal warning in addition to a written one. 2 data points were not ambiguity. 2 data points were a pattern. Tae-rock stood up from his desk. He walked to the window. He looked out at Busasan without really seeing it. He had spent 9 years building this position, 9 years of the right conversations, the right alliances, the right appearances. 9 years of understanding which truths to surface and which to bury. He had been good at it. He had been genuinely skilled at the particular art of making an organization work for him. He had buried the November email. He had buried the December meeting. He had buried Nadine Belrose. The problem was that Nadine Belrose had kept receipts. And now Park Jun-seo, quiet, cautious, never make a move unless. Your Sir Jun-seo was sitting in a meeting on the 43rd floor telling someone everything he knew. Tae-rock turned away from the window. He needed to think. He needed to act before Moojin had the full picture, or the full picture became the only picture anyone was looking at. He picked up his phone. He made one more call. The person on the other end picked up after 2 rings. I need to meet with you today, Tae-rock said. Not in the building. There was a pause. How serious? The voice said. Tayrock looked at his office door. Through the glass panel, he could see the operations floor, the desks, the screens, the junior employees who had spent the last 2 days watching everything shift beneath them. He could see Nadine's desk from here. She was at it. Working, not looking his direction. Serious enough, Tayrock said. He ended the call. And across the building, in a small conference room on the 14th floor that Mujin's investigators had been using for the past 18, Park Jun-seo opened his notebook to December's entries and began to read them aloud, word by word, while someone across the table typed everything he said into a document that would be on Mujin's desk before the end of the day. The point of no return, when it came, did not announce itself. It looked like a notebook. It sounded like a calm voice, reading meeting minutes from 3 months ago in a small room that smelled like recycled air and old coffee. But by the time Jun-seo closed the notebook and looked up, the last door Tayrock had left available to himself had quietly, irrevocably shut. The document Jun-seo had read from landed on Mujin's desk at 4:47 in the afternoon, and by 5:15, 3 other things had also landed on that desk that nobody had been expecting. The first was a supplemental report from Mujin's internal investigations team, the one he had activated the morning after the billing crisis. They had been running parallel to the Jun-seo interview, pulling financial records and departmental communications, going back not 3 months but 4 years. And what they found in those 4 years was not the story of an incompetent manager making isolated, poor decisions. It was something more deliberate, more architected. A pattern of redirection of routing credit upward toward Tayrock and accountability downward toward people who didn't have the standing to push back. The second thing was a communication log. Internal messaging records between Tayrock and 2 people in the procurement division, timestamped that morning, in which the phrasing was careful enough to be deniable in isolation, but which, read in sequence, constituted a clear attempt to coordinate a counter-narrative before Mujin's review was complete. The third thing was a name. The name was Choi Byung-soo. He was a mid-level contracts manager in the legal compliance division. He had been at Haniul Crest for 6 years. He had no obvious connection to Tayrock that appeared in the official organizational chart. But he had received 4 payments over the past 2 years from a discretionary operations account that Tayrock controlled, and those payments had no corresponding project codes, no attached deliverables, and no documentation of any kind. Mujin read all of it. He read it the way he read everything linearly, completely, without expression. Then he set the documents down and made 2 calls. The first was to his security director. The second was to his attorney. He did not make a third call. He did not contact Tayrock. He did not contact HR. He did not contact anyone in the chain of management that Tayrock had spent 9 years cultivating. He sat at his desk for a long time after the calls ended, looking at the harbor. She picked up Nadine's incident report, the 14-page one she had filed the previous morning, and he read it a second time, from the beginning, with the new information sitting beside it. He was reading it differently now, not as a technical document about a billing failure, as a window into something he had allowed to grow in the structure of his own company while he was looking at other things. That was the part that made his jaw tighten in a way that didn't loosen for the rest of the evening. He had signed off on Tayrock's quarterly reports for 9 years. He had read them. He had approved them. He had believed them. He was not a man who enjoyed discovering he had been deceived. But what he found genuinely intolerable, what sat in his chest like a splinter that had gone deep, was discovering that the deception had been made possible partly by his own inattention. He did not excuse himself for it. He also did not dwell. He picked up his pen and wrote 3 words on a notepad. Then he went back to work. Nadine had spent the afternoon in her old familiar groove, the one where the work was complex enough to require her full attention, and she could stop thinking about everything else. She had run a full validation sweep of the claim's routing restoration, documented 2 secondary configuration patches she had implemented that morning, a sound like green, and started drafting a training framework that would give URIM, and whoever came after him, an actual structured understanding of how the billing architecture functioned rather than the patchwork of informal knowledge transfer that had been the previous system. She was almost done with the framework's table of contents when her phone lit up. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. Ms. Belrose. The voice was male, professionally neutral, the specific neutralities of someone who delivers information for a living. This is the office of Lee Tae-young at Koryo Financial Group. I'm following up on your application submitted earlier this week. Mr. Lee would like to meet with you Thursday morning if you're available. He was very impressed with your profile. Koryo Financial, the largest competitor in Hanul Crest's private medical services sector. She had sent them her resume on day 2, when she was covering bases and not expecting much. She looked at her screen, at the training framework she was building for a company that had fired her 9 days ago. "I'll need to check my schedule," she said. "Can I confirm by tomorrow morning?" "Of course. We'll hold the time." She hung up, sat very still for a moment. The training framework was still open on her screen. She had written 4 pages of it. It was good. It was exactly the kind of document that would prevent the next crisis, the one after that, the dozen silent emergencies that accumulated in systems nobody fully understood. It was the kind of document Hanul Crest should have had years ago and didn't because there had never been anyone both willing and positioned to write it. She saved the file. Then she went back to the table of contents and kept writing. She did not close the Koryo inquiry. She also did not commit to it. She was not sure yet which direction she was choosing, and she had learned recently that the time between not being sure and being sure was worth taking seriously rather than rushing through. Tae-rock did not come back to the office after 3:15. People noticed, not loudly. The way you notice a sound that stops the absence is the signal. He had a 4 o'clock meeting on his calendar. He sent an email at 3:48 canceling it, citing external engagement. His door stayed closed. His deputy fielded 2 inquiries from his department in his absence. The person he had called from his office window was a man named Oh Sung-min, and they met at a restaurant in Sentum City at 4 o'clock, a private room in the back that the owner kept available for the kind of conversations that preferred walls. Oh Sung-min was 51. He had the comfortable authority of someone who had navigated enough difficult situations to stop being frightened by them. He had his own connections to Hanul Crest that were not visible on any organizational document, and his relationship with Tae-rock was the kind that doesn't appear in company records. Tae-rock explained the situation. He was precise. He did not embellish. In moments of real crisis, he shed the performative qualities and became the person underneath them, which was sharper and less appealing, but more useful. Oh Sung-min listened without interrupting. When Tae-rock finished, Oh Sung-min poured himself another glass of water and looked at the condensation on the outside of the jug for a moment. "Junsu talked," he said. "Yes, and the payments to Choi." Tae-rock went very still. "What about the payments?" Oh Sung-min looked at him. "CO's investigation team has been in the financial records since yesterday's morning. If they're in the financial records, they've seen the Choi payments." The air in the room changed. Tae-rock felt it change, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Those payments have no documentation," Tae-rock said. "That's the problem," Oh Sung-min said. "Documented payments can be explained. Undocumented payments require a story, and right now you don't control the story." He set the glass down. "Seo Mujin is not going to be managed on this, Tae-rock. You know who he is. You've known who he is this whole time. The question is what you do in the next 24 hours, before this becomes something you can't shape." Tae-rock sat back. "What are my options?" Oh Sung-min looked at him with the expression of someone who has had this conversation before in different rooms with different people, and knows how it ends. "You have one option," he said, "and it has a very short window." Nadine found out about the Choi payments at 8:17 the next morning. She found out because Mujin told her himself. He had called her upstairs at 8, and she had arrived with her coffee and her notebook, and the specific, careful attention she brought to any room he occupied, which was something she had noticed herself doing and hadn't decided yet how to feel about. He told her about the payments. He told her about the communications Taerock had sent that morning, attempting to coordinate counter-statements. He told her about the investigation team's findings in the financial records. He was methodical about it. He gave her the information in sequence, without editorializing, the way you brief someone who needs to understand the full terrain before making a decision. When he finished, Nadine sat with it for a moment. "The payments to Choi," she said. "What were they for?" "We don't know yet," Moojin said. "Choi has been asked to come in this morning." "Does Taerock know that?" "He will shortly." Nadine looked at the harbor. The morning was overcast. The water was dark gray and flat. "This is bigger than the billing system," she said. Yes, this was always bigger than the billing system. Moojin looked at her. "What do you mean?" She turned from the window. She thought about how to say it, how to say something she had felt for a long time, at the level of instinct, without having had the data to name it. "There were moments," she said slowly, over the years. Moments where something in the financial reconciliation didn't sit right. A vendor payment that cleared faster than it should have. A contract amendment that appeared in the system without going through the standard approval chain. Small things. Things that could always be explained as administrative irregularity if you looked at any one of them in isolation. She paused. "I flagged 2 of them, in 2021 and in 2022. Taerock told me I was misreading the workflow." She held Moojin's gaze. "I let it go, because I needed the job." The room was very quiet. Moojin did not look away. "The 2021 flag," he said. "Is there documentation?" "I kept copies of everything I submitted. It's a habit I developed a long time ago." She paused. "I have them at home." Something shifted in Moojin's expression. Not surprised exactly. More like the confirmation of something he had already suspected. "I'll need those documents," he said. "I know," Nadine said. She went home at lunch. She came back with a folder. Choi Byung-soo arrived at the building at 10:15, summoned by a message from Moojin's office that was worded carefully but left no room for interpretation about the nature of the meeting. He was 37, medium height, with the slightly collapsed posture of someone who carries anxiety in his shoulders, and had been carrying considerably more than usual for the past 24 hours. He was shown to a conference room on the 14th floor. Moojin's lead investigator, a woman named Shin Ha-yoon, was waiting. Beside her was a stack of printed financial records. Ha-yoon did not begin with pleasantries. She slid the top document across the table. "This is a record of 4 payments made from the discretionary operations account, controlled by Kwon Taerock, to your personal bank account over the last 2 years. Would you like to tell me what these payments were for?" Choi looked at the document. His breathing was audible. "Consulting services," he said. "What services?" "Contract review." He needed an outside perspective on some vendor agreements. "Contract review by someone in the legal compliance division of the same company," Ha-yoon said. "Paid to a personal account with no invoices, no project codes, and no record in the compliance division's billing system." She looked at him. "That's not consulting, Mr. Choi." "Would you like to try again?" Choi's hands, flat on the table, developed a tremor that he tried to control by pressing them harder against the surface. "I want to speak to a lawyer," he said. "That's your right," Ha-yoon said. "We'll pause here. But I want you to understand something before we do." She stacked the documents neatly. "We have the payment records. We have email communications between you and Taerock going back 18 months. We have access logs showing your credentials were used to review several contract files outside your assigned portfolio." She looked at him evenly. "The question we're trying to answer is whether you were the architect of what we're finding or a participant who was used. Those are very different positions to be in when this becomes a formal process." She paused. "A lawyer is going to take time to retain. The window in which the distinction between those 2 positions matters is shorter than you think." Choi sat very still, his mouth opened, closed. Then he said the vendor contracts. Ha-yoon placed her pen on the notepad in front of her. "Tell me about the vendor contracts." At 11:45, Ha-yoon knocked on the door of Moojin's office and delivered a summary that was 3 pages long and changed the shape of everything. Taerock had been directing contract awards. Not all of them. Not even most of them. but specific targeted contracts, primarily in logistics and equipment procurement, for two of Crest's hospital facilities had been influenced at the selection stage. Vendor bids had been reviewed by Choi before formal evaluation, and in at least 6 documented instances, the selected vendor was not the lowest compliant bid. The differential between the selected bid and the lowest compliant bid across those 6 contracts was approximately $4.3 million. Of that differential, Choi could account for approximately $900,000 moving through payment channels that connected through 2 intermediate steps to accounts Taerock's lawyer managed. $900,000 was not the full amount. It was what Choi knew about. It was possible it was a fraction of what was there. Moojin read the 3 pages. He set them down. He looked at the window for a moment. "Where is Taerock now?" he said. "He came in at 9, Ha-yoon said. "He's in his office. He doesn't know about this meeting." "He knows," Moojin said. "He has someone watching the building's movement. He knows Choi came in." He stood up. "Give me an hour." Ha-yoon nodded and left. Moojin stood at the window. He had known Haniel Crest carried a shadow operation he had inherited that when he inherited the company, along with the financial mechanisms that fed it, and he had spent the better part of 6 years working to separate the legitimate business from the machinery underneath it. It was slow work. It was not the kind of work that announced itself. What he had not known was that someone inside the legitimate operation had been running his own quiet traction alongside the machinery Moojin was already trying to dismantle. Taerock had not been stealing from the criminal operation. He had been stealing from the legitimate company, the clean company. The part Moojin was building for the future. He picked up his phone. He made a call he did not enjoy making. He was precise, and he said what he needed to say in fewer than 3 minutes. Then he hung up. He thought about Nadine's folder, now sitting on his desk. The 2021 flag, the 2022 flag. The moment she had seen something and raised her hand and been told she was misreading the workflow. She had not been misreading anything. She had been the closest thing this company had to an immune system, and they had fired her for it. Nadine was at her desk when the energy in the building shifted. She felt it before she understood it. A change in the air, the particular atmospheric pressure drop that happens when something significant is moving through an organizational structure that people are trying to read and can't fully see. Conversation shortened. People moved with a slightly different quality of attention. A sound like Greenwood Department. 2 people from the legal crossed the floor toward the executive elevators, which never happened in the middle of the day. Yirim felt it too. She looked up from her screen and across the gap between their desks with the expression of someone trying to calibrate. "What's happening?" Yirim said quietly. "I don't know yet," Nadine said. That was only half true. She had a shape of it in her mind, the 3 pages she imagined Ha-yoon had found, the payments she had handed over that morning, the architecture of what she had seen over the years and only partly understood. She had the shape. She didn't have the specific weight of it yet. Her phone lit up at 12:43. It was Moojin's assistant. "Mr. CEO would like you in the conference room, on the 14th floor. Not the penthouse. The 14th floor. The same one she had seen the legal department walking toward." She closed her laptop. She stood up. She noticed her hands were steady and made a note of it. Yirim was watching her. "Keep an eye on the queue clearance rate," Nadine said. "If it drops below 80%, flag me." "Okay," Yirim said. Nadine turned. "Are you all right?" She considered the question. It was genuine. There was no performance in it, no strategic deployment, just a 28-year-old woman who was paying attention. "I will be," Nadine said, and she walked to the elevator. The 14th floor conference room had 6 people in it when she arrived. Moojin was at the head of the table. Ha-yoon was beside him with a laptop and a document stack. 2 people Nadine recognized from the legal department. 1 person she didn't recognize, who had the quality of someone from outside the company, a certain remove in their attention, the way they sat slightly back from the table. And Taerock. Taerock was seated at the far end of the table. He had known she was coming. She could see it in the precise stillness of his posture, the way he had arranged himself to communicate control, and not the other way around. He was wearing the charcoal suit again. He had a glass of water in front of him that he had not touched. He looked at her when she walked in. She looked back. There was a moment, 3, maybe 4 seconds, in which something passed between them that had no name in corporate language. 11 years of a professional relationship reaching its actual end in real time. Nadine sat down. Mujin did not waste time, Ms. Belrose. You submitted documentation this morning relating to 2 internal flags from 2021 and 2022. I've shared those documents with our legal team. I'd like you to walk through each one what you observed, how it was documented, and how it was resolved. She opened her notebook. She talked for 21 minutes. She was precise. She described what she had seen in each instance without elaborating beyond what she could document. She was not there to prosecute. She was there to provide information accurately and completely. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Tayrok's attorney, the person she hadn't recognized, of course he had an attorney. She should have expected an attorney said, "The flags you submitted were subjective assessments of workflow anomalies. They don't constitute evidence of irregularity. They constitute observations that were documented at the time," Nadine said. "I'm not characterizing them as evidence. I'm characterizing them as what I saw and what I reported." And both were reviewed and dismissed as workflow anomalies by department management. Both were reviewed and dismissed by Kwan Tayrok, Nadine said, who, as this investigation appears to be establishing, had a specific interest in them not being escalated. The attorney began to respond. Tayrok said, "That's enough." It was quiet enough in the room that the 2 words landed distinctly. Everyone looked at him, including his attorney. Tayrok looked at Nadine. His expression had shifted not to anger, not to the professional composure she had watched him maintain through every difficult moment in 3 years, to something more stripped than either of those things. He looked like a person who had run a very long calculation and arrived at the end of it. "You knew," he said. His voice was quiet, not accusatory, closer to something like recognition delayed and unwilling but real. "I knew something," Nadine said. "I didn't know what. But you kept the files. I always kept the files." Tayrok looked at the glass of water in front of him. He looked at it for a long time. "I dismissed you," he said, "because you were too good at seeing things." The room held very still. Nadine looked at him. She did not feel the vindication she might have expected to feel. She felt something more exhausting than that, the weight of a truth that should have been obvious years earlier, that had cost her years it hadn't needed to cost her, that was only arriving now because a crisis had forced it into the open. "I know," she said. Mujin was watching both of them. Tayrok turned toward Mujin. "I'd like to discuss terms," he said. Not to his attorney, directly to Mujin. The attorney's jaw tightened. Mujin looked at him for a moment. "That conversation will happen," he said. "Not in this room." Tayrok nodded. He picked up the water glass and took a long drink. Set it down precisely where it had been. Then he looked at Nadine one more time. "Yi Rim," he said. "She didn't know anything about the contracts." "I know that too," Nadine said. Something in his face shifted again. Whether it was relief or guilt or both, she couldn't have said, and she decided it wasn't her business to determine. Ha Yun asked Nadine to remain for a few additional questions. Tayrok was escorted from the room by the 2 legal department representatives. His attorney followed, already on his phone, speaking in a low, rapid voice. The door closed. Nadine sat alone with Ha-Yun and the unfamiliar outside attorney, and the weight of the past 11 years rearranging itself around a shape she hadn't previously been able to see clearly. The billing crisis was not the crisis. The billing crisis had been a surface event, a symptom of something deeper and more deliberate that had been running beneath the surface of Haniel Crest's operations for years, in the space between what Tayrok reported and what was actually happening, in the gap between what Nadine had seen and what she'd been allowed to surface. Ha-Yun opened a new document on her laptop. "Ms. Belrose, I'd like to go through the 2021 flag in more detail. You noted an expedited clearance on a vendor payment in the 3rd quarter. Can you describe specifically which vendor and what the payment amount was?" Nadine opened her notebook. She talked for another hour. When she finally walked out of the 14th floor conference room at 3:20 in the afternoon, The building felt different than it had when she'd entered it that morning. Not quieter, not louder, just different, the specific texture of a place where something that had been weight-bearing has been removed, and nobody yet knows exactly how much the structure depended on it. She stopped outside the elevator and stood for a moment. She had handed them everything she had, every flag, every email, every document she had kept for years. As a habit, she'd never been able to fully explain to herself the instinct of someone who operates in systems and understands that what happens in systems leaves marks, whether or not anyone is looking for them. She had given it all to an investigation she didn't control, in service of an organization that had fired her, in a situation that was now significantly larger than a billing crisis and pointed toward consequences she couldn't predict. The executive director contract was still on Mujin's desk, unsigned. Koryo Financial was still waiting for her answers about Thursday. And somewhere in this building, the shape of what came next was forming without her input. And she was standing outside an elevator on the 14th floor, trying to decide whether that terrified her or something else. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in, and somewhere on the 9th floor, in a small interior office that Taerock's attorney had commandeered for the next 2 hours, Taerock sat alone for 3 minutes. Before the attorney came back in, and in those 3 minutes he did something that none of his 9 years at Hanwell Crest had prepared him for. He opened his email. He typed 4 sentences. He addressed the message to Mujin's private account, which he had never been given officially, and which he had obtained 3 years ago through methods that were exactly as questionable as everything else this investigation was now uncovering. He wrote, "There is more than what Choi told you. There are accounts you haven't found yet. I will tell you everything, but I need something in return that has nothing to do with money." He read it twice. Then he pressed send before he could talk himself out of it, and the version of Kwon Taerock that had existed inside Hanwell Crest for 9 years ended in that moment as definitively as a door closing. And what came through on the other side was something rawer and less constructed, and not yet sure of its own shape, facing the particular terror of a man who has spent his entire professional life managing what other people knew about him, and who has just voluntarily surrendered that control for the first time in his life. Mujin read Taerock's email at 3:41 in the afternoon. He read it once. Then he set his phone face down on the desk and looked at the harbor for exactly 90 seconds, which was how long it took him to make the decision about how to proceed. Then he picked up the phone and forwarded the email to Ha-yoon with 2 words attached. "Document this." He did not respond to Taerock. He let the silence do what silence does. To a man who has just made himself vulnerable and received nothing back, let it expand. Let it fill every available space. Let it press on the walls of the small 9th floor office, where Taerock was sitting with his attorney and his sent message and the particular agony of not knowing whether the most consequential thing he had ever done had landed or disappeared into nothing. Mujin understood exactly what he was doing. He had used silence as a tool for a long time. In rooms where other men raised their voices, he had learned that the absence of response was frequently more destabilizing than any counter-argument. It created a vacuum that people filled with their own fear, and fear made people talk, and talking made people precise in ways they hadn't intended to be. He gave Taerock 2 hours, then he sent Ha-yoon down to the 9th floor with a single instruction: bring him up. What happened in the 43rd floor office between 4:50 and 7:15 that evening was not something that appeared in any official record. Ha-yoon's notes from the session were sealed under the company's legal privilege framework. The attorney sat in the corner and said almost nothing after the first 20 minutes. What Taerock said in those 2 hours and 25 minutes would take investigators another 3 weeks to fully verify, cross-reference, and document. But the shape of it was this: Taerock had not been operating alone. The vendor contract manipulation was real, and it was his. But it was smaller than the accounts Mujin hadn't found yet, accounts that connected not to Taerock's personal finances, but to a parallel structure that had existed inside Hanwell Crest's logistics division for longer than Taerock had been with the company. He had discovered it by accident in his second year. Rather than reporting it, He had used his knowledge of it as leverage and eventually as infrastructure, folding his own extraction into the existing machinery in ways that made both harder to detect. The accounts Mu Jin hadn't found yet were not in Haniel Crest's financial system. They were in the logistics subsidiary's external settlement, records a set of vendor reconciliations accounts that processed payments for transportation contracts and had, for approximately 4 years, been processing payments for things that were not transportation. The person who had built that structure was not someone from Taerock's level. He was 3 floors up, or had been. His name was Director Lim Byung-hwan, and he had retired 18 months ago with a ceremony and a plaque and a speech about his 20 years of service to Haniel Crest Holdings. He was 62 years old, and he lived in a house in Gyeongju that was significantly larger than a retired logistics director's pension should have been able to sustain. Mu Jin listened to all of this without expression. When Taerock finished talking, Mu Jin sat very still for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" he said. Taerock looked at him. He was exhausted in a way that had stripped the last of the performance. Out of him, the charcoal suit was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and he was sitting in a chair in CO Mujin's office, telling the truth for possibly the first time in 9 years, and he looked like what that actually costs. "Because you were going to find it anyway," Taerock said. "And because," he stopped, looked at the desk, "because I sent that email and then I sat in that office for 2 hours waiting, and I realized that I've spent 9 years making sure I was never the one holding the bag, and I'm tired." He exhaled slowly. "I'm just tired." Mu Jin looked at him for a long time. "You'll give us everything, documents, account numbers, Lim's communication records if you have them. I have them. All of it goes to Ha-yoon by 9 tomorrow morning." "Yes. And you understand what that means for your position?" Taerock's jaw worked. "Yes." Mu Jin stood up. "Then we're done for tonight." Taerock stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. At the door he paused, one hand on the frame. "Belrose," he said. "Not a question." Mu Jin looked at him. "She's the best systems person this company has ever had," Taerock said. "I knew that when I fired her. I fired her because of it." He paused. "I'm telling you, because you should know the difference between my judgment and what's actually true." He walked out. Mu Jin stood in his office for a moment in the quiet. Then he picked up his phone and called Nadine. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was still awake, which at 9:40 in the evening meant she was either working or pretending not to think about work, which in her case amounted to the same thing. "I need to meet with you tomorrow morning," he said. 8 o'clock. "But before that, I need to ask you something." She waited. "The Choreo financial interview. Thursday." A pause. "How do you know about that?" "I know most things that happen in relation to this company's competitive landscape," he said. It wasn't an apology, just a fact delivered without embellishment. "Then you know I haven't confirmed it," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not calling to pressure you. I'm calling because tomorrow is going to be a difficult day, and I want you to walk into it with full information." He paused. "What's happening inside this company right now is larger than the billing incident, larger than Taerock. There are structural problems that are going to require significant operational restructuring over the next several months. And I need someone at the executive level who understands these systems from the inside, not from a consultant's distance. I need someone who has seen what's been hidden inside them." Nadine was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me this now," she said at 9:40 at night. "Yes, because tomorrow is going to make it clearer, and you want me to have processing time." "Yes." She let out a long breath. "What time did you say?" 8 o'clock. "I'll be there," she said, and she hung up. She sat at her kitten table with her phone face up in front of her, and Phyllis, the succulent, and the Choreo financial calendar invitation still open on her laptop, and she thought about a lot of things for a long time. Then she closed the Choreo tab, opened a new document, and started writing. She arrived at 7:53 the next morning. The building had a different quality to it, a held breath quality, the specific atmosphere of a place where people know something's happening and don't yet know all of what it is. She had felt this before, in smaller ways, over 11 years. She had never felt it at this magnitude. Yi Rim was at her desk when Nadine crossed the floor. She looked up. Nadine gave her a nod that she hoped communicated something like, "Hold steady," and kept walking. Mujin's assistant met her at the executive elevator and brought her up to the 43rd floor. Mujin was at his desk. He had the 3-page Ha-Yun summary, Taerak's document delivery, which had arrived at 8:52 that morning, 7 minutes before Nadine had walked, and a second report from the external forensic accounting team he had engaged the previous evening spread across the desk in a configuration that was not quite organized but was legible to whoever had arranged it, which was him. He briefed her. He told her about Lim. He told her about the logistics subsidiary accounts. He told her what Taerak had said about how the structure worked and how long it had been running. He was precise and thorough, and he did not soften any of it. When he was done, Nadine sat with the information for a moment. "The logistics subsidiary," she said. "Their settlement accounts route through the same reconciliation system I manage on the hospital billing side." Mujin looked at her. "Not the same account," she said quickly. "Different ledgers, but the same underlying infrastructure. Same processing engine." She paused. "If the forensic team is going in, they need to know that some of what they're going to find those may look like billing anomalies on my side that aren't their reconciliation artifacts from the two systems talking to each other. If they don't know to account for that, they're going to flag a lot of false positives." Mujin reached for his phone. "I'll have Ha-Yun connect you with the forensic lead this morning, before they go any deeper into the settlement records," Nadine said. "Yes." She nodded. He made the call. She sat in the chair across from his desk and thought about the fact that she was here consulting on the forensic audit of financial crimes inside a company that had fired her 15 days ago, and she decided to deal with the philosophical dimensions of that later. The forensic team lead was a woman named Dr. Park Soo-jin, 45, who operated with the specific economy of movement and speech that comes from decades of finding things in systems that other people tried very hard to bury. A sound like green wood splitting. She had been brought in from an external firm the previous afternoon, and she had spent the night in the 14th floor conference room with 3 of her analysts and a great deal of coffee. She met Nadine at 9:30 and spent the first 4 minutes of the conversation asking technical questions that got progressively more specific, which was her version of calibration, figuring out how much Nadine actually knew versus how much she thought she knew. By the 4th minute, she had her answer. "Walk me through the reconciliation architecture," Soo-jin said. From the settlement trigger to final clearance, Nadine walked her through it. Soo-jin listened without interrupting, which was the highest compliment she gave. When Nadine finished, Soo-jin turned to her lead analyst. "Restructure the query set. Flag only transactions where the settlement origin code doesn't match the routing authority. Anything that looks like a billing anomaly with a valid reconciliation handshake, park it in a separate queue and I'll review manually." She looked at Nadine. "How long have these two systems been integrated?" "Since 2018, Nadine said. "I integrated them. It was supposed to reduce redundant processing." "Did it?" "Yes. It also apparently made it significantly easier to move money between the logistics accounts and the hospital billing layer without the movement appearing anomalous from either side." Nadine paused. "I didn't know that was going to be a use case." Soo-jin looked at her with an expression that was not accusatory and not warm. It was the expression of someone for whom information is the only relevant category. You built an efficient system. Someone else used the efficiency for something you didn't intend. That's a design consequence, not a design choice. "I know," Nadine said. "I'm telling you because when your team finds it, I want you to understand the architecture before you characterize it." Soo-jin nodded. "Sit with us for the next few hours. I may need you to interpret what we're finding in real time." Nadine pulled up a chair. What the forensic team found in the next 4 hours was not $900,000. Was closer to $6 million, moved across a 4-year period in increments specifically calibrated to stay below the automated flagging thresholds, which meant whoever had set it up understood those thresholds, which meant they had inside knowledge of the monitoring system's parameters, which meant the problem was not just Lim and Taerak. Soo-jin brought this to Mujin at 1:15 in the afternoon, with Nadine beside her. Mujin listened. He was standing at the window. He did not turn around until Sujin finished. When he did turn around, his face had the specific quality of a man who has received information that confirmed something he had been trying very hard not to confirm. The monitoring thresholds, he said. Who set those parameters? Sujin glanced at Nadine. Nadine felt it before she understood it, a cold drop in her chest, the particular sensation of standing at the edge of something and realizing the ground is farther down than you estimated. The automated monitoring system, she said carefully, was configured in 2019. I configured the base architecture, but the flagging thresholds, the specific numerical parameters, those were set by a joint team team. I provided the technical framework. Someone from compliance provided the regulatory benchmarks. Who from compliance? Mujin said. Nadine looked at him. She knew the answer. She had the meeting notes somewhere. She had worked with him for 2 days on that configuration, and she had not thought about him once in the context of any of this, because he was quiet and thorough and technically precise, and she had no reason to. Choi Byung-soo, she said. The room went very still. Sujin's lead analyst stopped typing. Nadine felt the full architecture of it come together in her mind with the specific sickening clarity of a pattern resolving. Choi had been inside the monitoring configuration from the beginning, which meant the flagging thresholds had been set to protect the extraction rather than to detect it, which meant she had built a compliance system whose internal parameters had been quietly shaped by the person it was supposed to catch. She had built it. She had handed it over. She had trusted the collaboration. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't know, Mujin said. His voice was even. Not comforting, he was not performing comfort, but unambiguous. This is not a question of what you knew. It should have been structured so that one person couldn't set those parameters, Nadine said. Her voice was tight. Not with tears, she wasn't there yet, and maybe she wouldn't get there, but her throat was tight with something that was the operational equivalent of fury, turned inward. I should have required a second sign-off on the threshold configuration. I didn't because Choi was compliance and I was systems, and I thought we were. She stopped. That's a gap. That's my gap. Yes, Mujin said. And it's going to be corrected. Right now I need to know whether there are other configurations in the system that Choi had access to set unilaterally. Nadine turned to the table. She pulled Sujin's laptop toward her and started running an access query. She found 3 more configuration layers with Choi's credentials in the setup history. She was going through the second one when her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She glanced at it. A message from Yi Rim. Something's happening on the floor. Legal team just came through and took 2 people from procurement. Everyone is panicking. Are you coming back down? Nadine turned to Mujin. The procurement team. Yes, he said. That's happening now. Yi Rim is asking me go, Mujin said. Your team needs you visible. She pushed back from the table. She grabbed her notebook. She was at the door when Mujin said her name. She turned. The gap in the configuration sign-off, he said. That structural flaw, I want you to design the correction. Not Ha-yoon, not Sujin. You, he paused, because you understand where the weakness was, and that means you understand how to close it in a way nobody else will. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she walked out. The operations floor was not panicking. Not technically, but it had the quality of a room where panic was circulating just below the surface, kept in check by professional habit and the uncertainty of not knowing how much to react to. 2 people from procurement had been walked out by legal at 1:47. Everyone had seen it. Nobody was talking about it directly. The conversations happening at desks were shorter than usual, and the silences between them longer. Yi Rim was standing at the edge of the cluster of desks nearest the window when Nadine came off the elevator. She saw Nadine, and the tension in her shoulders dropped by approximately 1 notch. What's happening? Yi Rim said low when Nadine reached her. The company is doing an internal audit, Nadine said, equally low. There are some financial irregularities that go back several years. The legal team is managing it. She looked at Yi Rim directly. You and I are not part of it. Our job right now is to keep the billing system running, keep the claims processing, and be the steadiest thing on this floor. Yi Rim looked at the floor, looked back up. Okay. I need you to check the queue clearance rate. Run a manual validation on this morning's international claims batch. Come back to me with numbers. Okay, Yi Rim said again. Different this time, not agreement but engagement, the shift from passive to active that Nadine had been watching happen in her over the past 2 weeks. She moved. Nadine sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the access configuration query she had started upstairs and continued running it from her local credentials, cross-referencing Choi's setup history against the full system architecture. She found the third configuration layer at 215. She found the fourth at 240 sitting, at 248, and this one was different from the others, not a threshold setting, but a routing exception that was dormant in the system's current state, but that could, under specific conditions related to high-volume processing periods, divert a small percentage of transaction records to a secondary log that was not part of the standard audit trail. She sat back in her chair. If that exception had been triggered during the 4 years of the extraction, and she had no way of knowing yet whether it had been, there was a subset of transaction records that might not be in the dataset Sujin's team was analyzing. She picked up her phone and called Sujin directly. I found something else, she said. Sujin was quiet for a beat. How significant? I don't know yet. Could be nothing. Could mean your dataset has a gap. Nadine was already pulling the exception parameters onto her screen. I need about 30 minutes to characterize it. Can you hold your summary analysis until I come back to you? You have 30 minutes, Sujin said and hung up. Nadine worked. She pulled every transaction log from the 4-year period. She ran a comparison against the routing exception's trigger conditions. She was 40 minutes in, not 30, when she found the first confirmed instance of the exception firing. Her coffee had gone cold. She hadn't touched it in an hour. Yi Rim had come back twice with validation numbers, and Nadine had reviewed them with the split attention of someone managing 2 critical tasks simultaneously, which was not ideal, but was what the situation required. The exception had fired on 14 separate occasions across the 4-year period. On 11 of those occasions, during high-volume processing windows, a percentage of transaction records had been routed to the secondary log. The secondary log still existed. It was dormant and buried in a maintenance directory and had not been part of any standard reporting since 2020, but it still existed because nobody had deleted it, and systems like this did not delete things automatically unless you told them to. Nadine copied the directory path. She called Sujin. I need to give you a directory path, she said. There's a secondary log your team hasn't accessed. It may contain transaction records from the extraction period that aren't in your primary dataset. Sujin's voice changed in a way that was small but perceptible to someone listening carefully. Send it. Nadine sent it. She hung up and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she became aware that someone was standing at the edge of her workspace. She looked up. It was not Yi Rim. It was a man she had never seen before mid-50s, the particular build of someone who had been physically substantial earlier in life and had settled, ascening, wearing a suit, slightly too formal for a business visit, and carrying a leather briefcase that he held at his side like it weighed more than it should. He was looking at her with the specific attention of someone who knows exactly who they are looking at. Ms. Belrose, he said. His Korean was accented in a way she couldn't immediately place. Not Seoul's accent. Something regional and older. I was hoping to speak with you. Nadine looked at him. I don't know you, she said. No, he said, but I know a great deal about your work. He sat down in the chair beside her desk without being invited to, which was the first signal. My name is Lim Byung-hwan, the second signal. The room did not change around her. Nobody on the floor had noticed him yet. Yi Rim was at her own desk with her back to them. The floor hummed with its ordinary noise of keyboards and low conversations and the processing hum of the server racks behind the east wall. Nadine looked at Lim Byung-hwan and she understood, in the specific cold clarity of someone who has just had all the context they need to read a situation correctly, that the retired logistics director, who had built the extraction structure and lived in a house in Ginju that his pension couldn't explain, had come to Haniul Crest's operations floor this afternoon, as he had found out that Tayrok had talked, and because he had found out that a forensic team was in the building, and because the one variable he hadn't accounted for in all of that was the woman who had been quietly mapping the inside of this company's systems for 11 years and had just found his secondary log. He had come because of her. He had come to do something about that. I think, Lim said, and his voice was the calm of a man who has decided on a course of action and is past the point of reconsidering it, that you and I should have a conversation before you share whatever you've just found with anyone else. Nadine looked at him. Her phone was on the desk to her left. Mujin's number was in her recent calls. Lim's eyes moved to the phone and back to her face. I wouldn't, he said. Nadine kept her hands flat on the desk. Her heart was beating at a rate she was aware of but was not going to let show on her face. She had spent 11 years in this building, keeping things off her face. Mr. Lim, she said, and her voice came out exactly as steady as she needed it to be. Whatever you think you're going to accomplish by sitting at my desk right now. I'm going to accomplish a conversation, he said. That's all. I'm not a violent man, Ms. Belrose. I'm a practical one. And practically speaking, you are currently in possession of information that affects several people's futures, including mine. He set the briefcase on his knee. I think it's worth talking about what the most reasonable outcome looks like for everyone involved. Yi Rim turned around. She saw the man at Nadine's desk. She saw Nadine's face. She saw Nadine. She was 28, and she had not been trained for this, and she had no framework for what she was looking at except that something was wrong. Their eyes met for half a second. Nadine moved her eyes to Yi Rim's phone on her desk. Then back to Lim. And Yi Rim, young, inexperienced, recently humbled, currently building something new from the wreckage of her professional mistakes, understood exactly what she was being asked to do, and she picked up her phone, turned away from Lim's line of sight, and started typing with the quiet deliberateness of someone who has made a decision that is going to matter. Lim began to speak. Nadine let him talk. She needed 3 minutes. Yi Rim sent the message in 47 seconds. Nadine knew because she was counting. Not loudly, not with any visible movement of her lips, but in the back of her mind where she ran parallel processes, the way the billing system ran parallel processes, multiple threads, simultaneously, without interference. One thread was listening to Lim Byung-Wan talk. One thread was counting seconds. A thread was reading the room, around her, tracking the position of every person on the floor, the way she always tracked the architecture of systems she was responsible for. Lim was talking about reasonableness. He used the word 3 times in the first 90 seconds, which told her everything she needed to know about the conversation he thought he was having. He talked about the complexity of long institutional relationships. He talked about how information, depending on how it was framed and to whom it was delivered, could lead to very different outcomes. He was not threatening her. He was doing something more sophisticated than threatening. He was building the scaffolding of a negotiation that assumed she was the kind of person who could be negotiated with. He had spent 20 years inside Haniul Crest. He had apparently learned a great deal about how to manage people. He had not learned the right things about Nadine Belrose. At 47 seconds, she saw Yi Rim set her phone face down on her desk and turn back to her screen with the deliberate normalcy of someone acting natural and not quite pulling it off, but doing it anyway. Good enough, Nadine thought. She let Lim finish his sentence. Then she looked at him with the specific quality of attention she reserved for system errors that required careful diagnosis. Before she touched anything, Mr. Lim, she said, I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You're suggesting that the information I've found this afternoon, the secondary log, the routing exception, the transaction records, could be characterized differently depending on the framing. He settled slightly in the chair. He thought she was engaging. That's one way to put it. And you're proposing that we discuss an alternative framing. I'm proposing that we discuss what serves everyone's interests most constructively, he said. You're a consultant here. Your contract is 3 months. What happens after that is not guaranteed. I, on the other hand, have relationships in this city's business community that extend well beyond Haniul Crest. relationships that could be quite useful to someone with your skill set, looking to establish herself at the executive level. Nadine looked at him. She thought about the cardboard box, the coffee mug with the broken handle, the taxi home, and the 4 blocks of tears, and the bills on the kitchen table. She thought about 11 years of carrying a company on her back and being thanked for it with a manila envelope that had been prepared before the conversation. She thought about what it had cost her to get from that lobby to this desk, and she thought about what it would mean to let this man sit across from her and offer her something in exchange for her silence about where the money went. She thought about all of that for exactly as long as it took Mujin's security director and 2 other men to come off the elevator and cross the operations floor. Lim heard them. He turned. His face did not collapse, but something in it shifted, the particular shift of a man who has been outmaneuvered and knows it, and is deciding in real time how to carry the next 60 seconds. He turned back to Nadine. She was looking at him steadily. "You sent someone," he said. "I didn't have to," she said. "Someone else did." Yi-rim was still facing her screen. Her shoulders were very straight. The security director reached the desk. He was a compact man named Wu Jae-sung, who said almost nothing in professional settings and communicated what he needed to through positioning and patience. He positioned himself at the edge of Nadine's workspace and waited. Lim stood up slowly. He picked up his briefcase. He had the dignity of a man who has already decided that the manner of this exit is the only thing left he can control, and he was going to control it. "You're going to find," he said to Nadine, still quiet, still surface level composed, "that what's inside that secondary log is considerably more complicated than a clean narrative." "I know," Nadine said. "Systems usually are." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned and walked with Jae-sung toward the elevator, and the 2 other men fell in on either side of him with the practiced ease of people who have done this before and don't need to make it dramatic. The floor watched. Nobody spoke. Nadine turned back to her screen. Her hands, when she placed them on the keyboard, were not entirely steady. The steadiness had lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and now that it didn't need to anymore, the adrenaline was doing what adrenaline does when the threat has passed, cashing in everything it borrowed, all at once. She pressed her palms flat against the desk for a moment. Then she exhaled, long and slow, and started working. Yi-rim appeared at her desk 11 minutes later, with a cup of coffee that was hot and an expression that was trying to be professionally neutral and not quite succeeding. "I didn't know what to do," Yi-rim said, "so I texted Mr. CO's executive assistant. I wasn't sure if I should go directly to my—" "You did exactly right," Nadine said. Yi-rim looked at her. "Are you okay?" Nadine wrapped both hands around the coffee. It was the right temperature. "Working on it," she said. Yi-rim nodded. She turned to go back to her desk. "Yi-rim." She turned. Nadine looked at her. That took nerve. "What you just did." Yi-rim was quiet for a moment. "You told me regret changes what you do tomorrow," she said. "Not yesterday." Nadine looked at her for a long moment. "Go run the afternoon validation," she said. Yi-rim went. Lim, Byung-hwan, was held in a conference room on the 4th floor for 6 hours. Team worked through what his arrival at the building had confirmed that he had known before today, that Tae-rock had talked, which meant he had a source inside the building, or inside Tae-rock's attorney's circle. And that source was now a secondary investigation that ran parallel to everything else through the rest of the evening. Sujin's team accessed the secondary log at 4:17. They spent 3 hours going through it. What they found added approximately $1.8 million to the total extraction figure and, more critically, contained transaction identifiers that connected external accounts. Lim had used accounts that FOPSed. When cross-referenced with financial records Mujin's attorney had already subpoenaed, establish a chain of evidence that was significantly more prosecutable than what they had started the day with. Lim, to no one's surprise, said very little without his attorney present. With his attorney present, he said even less. It did not matter. The secondary log said enough on its own. Tae-rock's documentation, combined with Choi's earlier cooperation and the forensic team's reconstruction, gave investigators enough to work with for considerably longer than this one evening. The formal process, the reporting to financial regulators, the involvement of external authorities, The long, grinding institutional work of accountability was beginning, and it was going to take months, and it was going to be ugly, in ways that corporations find ugly: the press, the client relationships, the quiet conversations that has to happen with hospital executives and insurance partners and regulatory bodies that need to be told things before they read them elsewhere. None of that happened tonight. Tonight was just the beginning of the paper. Nadine finished her shift at 8:47 in the evening, which was late but not abnormally late for her, and she realized as she was shutting down her laptop that she had eaten nothing since 7 that morning, except the coffee Yirim brought her, and her body was registering this fact with the blunt insistence of someone who has been patient long enough. She put on her coat. She gathered her things with the specific careful attention she now brought to all transitions in this building, because she had learned that the moments between tasks were where the objects came for her. She was almost to the elevator when Mujin's assistant appeared. "Mr. Seo would like to see you before you leave," he said, "if you're willing." She looked at the elevator. She looked at the assistant. "Tell him I need to eat something first," she said. The assistant blinked. "He has food in his office," the assistant said after a pause. He anticipated. He stopped. Recalibrated. "He asked me to tell you there's food if that would help." Nadine looked at him for a moment. "Fine," she said. There was in fact food. Someone had ordered from a restaurant she didn't recognize Korean. Actual food, not the sad desk-adjacent eating she had been doing for the past 2 weeks, and it was set up on the low table near the seating area rather than the desk, which was a choice that communicated something about the register of the conversation Mujin intended. She sat down, she ate. He sat across from her and had tea and let her eat without filling the silence with anything, which was either considerate or the behavior of a man who had learned that silence is a more efficient use of time than noise. Possibly both. When she had eaten enough to think clearly, she set down the chopsticks and looked at him. "Lim is in custody," he said, "formally detained as of an hour ago. The external authorities are involved as of this afternoon. This is now larger than an internal matter." "I know," she said. "Taerock's cooperation is being factored into whatever comes next for him. I won't tell you the outcome is certain or that it's fair. Those processes take the shape they take." "I understand," she said. "The compliance monitoring system," he said. "The threshold configuration. I need a complete audit of every parameter Choi had access to set. Not Sujin's team. I started it this afternoon," she said. "I'll have a full report by end of week." He nodded. He looked at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, there was something in his face that was different from the precise, controlled quality it usually held, not less controlled, but differently intentioned. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a person they have been thinking about when they weren't in the same room. "The executive director position," he said. "I know," she said. "You've had more time than 24 hours. I've had approximately 36 hours of consecutive crisis," she said. "That's not really the same as thinking time." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at him. At the harbor behind him, which was dark now, the city lights reflecting off the water in broken lines. "I found the secondary log," she said. "I found it because I know this system the way I know it, because I've spent 11 years inside it. Every configuration, every integration point, every gap." She paused. "You need me to stay." "Yes," he said. "That's not the same as a reason for me to stay." He looked at her evenly. What would be? She thought about it. Not performing, thinking, actually doing it. "I want the training framework I've been building to become company policy. Mandatory structured training before anyone is given administrative access to operational systems. No exceptions, including executive hires." She paused. "I want an independent sign-off protocol on all monitoring threshold configurations. 2 qualified reviewers, minimum, neither of whom can be from the department being monitored." "Done," he said. "I want a direct reporting line to you on technical risk assessments. Not through an intermediary department. Not through HR. Direct. Yes. And I want Yirim to have a formal analyst title with a pay grade that reflects what she's actually doing, not what she was hired to do." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one, the same almost expression she had seen in the lobby on her first day back. Yirim. She held the floor today, Nadine said. She made a decision under pressure with incomplete information, and she made the right one. That deserves to be on record. I'll have the title updated by morning, he said. Nadine looked at him. Then I'll sign the contract, she said. He reached into a folder on the table and produced the executive director agreement. She noticed it had already been revised. There were new clauses that corresponded precisely to the condition she had just stated. He had written them before the conversation. She looked at him. You knew what I was going to say, she said. I knew what you should say, he said. I was prepared for the possibility that you would. She picked up the pen he offered. She signed where the signature line indicated. She set the pen down. One more thing, she said. He waited. The Corio financial interview. I need you to know I'm not holding it over you. I'm telling you I was genuinely considering it, and that what I'm choosing tonight is not a fallback. It's a choice. She met his eyes. I need that to be clear between us. It's clear, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. She stood up. She gathered her coat. She was reaching for her bag when her elbow caught the edge of the low table and the teacup rattled in its saucer, and she grabbed the edge of the table to stabilize it, which worked. But in the process, her notebook slid off the table's other side and hit the floor. She closed her eyes for one brief second. She heard Mujin pick up the notebook. She opened her eyes. He was holding it out. At some point, she said, I am going to stop doing that. I don't think so, he said. And there was something in his voice she had not heard before, something unguarded, the specific warmth that comes from genuine amusement that a person has stopped working to conceal. She took the notebook. She left. In the elevator on the way down, alone, she held the signed contract against her chest and breathed slowly in the particular way she breathed when something important had settled into place, and she was giving herself time to understand its weight. The weeks that followed were not easy. She had not expected easy. The formal investigation expanded the way these things expand, slowly, then everywhere at once. Financial regulators became involved in the third week. 2 of Lim's external accounts were frozen through a cross-border legal process that took another month to finalize. The press found the edge of the story, not the center of it. A brief item about regulatory scrutiny of Hunulcrest Logistics subsidiary that was accurate in its facts and incomplete in its picture, which was the best outcome available, and everyone who knew the full picture understood that. Hunulcrest's hospital partners were told privately, in carefully managed conversations, what had happened and what was being done. 3 of the 5 responded by requesting additional compliance documentation. 2 of them, when presented with Nadine's revised monitoring framework and the new threshold sign-off protocol, responded by strengthening their contracts rather than walking away. The 4th hospital partner, the one that had threatened to terminate during the billing crisis, sent a letter of continued confidence that used the phrase systematic governance improvement 3 times and was, in its bureaucratic way, a form of validation. Nadine read the letter, set it down, and went back to work. She was running 3 parallel tracks in those weeks. The forensic support helping Sujin's team interpret architectural decisions in the system that only she fully understood, which was a months-long project that required her to sit in rooms and explain choices she had made 3 and 5 and 7 years ago, and trace the paths those choices had created. The compliance framework, the new monitoring protocol, the threshold sign-off system, the training documentation, all of it being built from scratch in the gaps between everything else. And the department itself, which was now officially hers, with a headcount she had inherited and was reshaping, and a budget she had never managed at this scale, and the daily operational reality of keeping the billing infrastructure running while simultaneously rebuilding the structural weakness underneath it. She delegated more than she ever had. She was not good at it at first. The old reflex of just doing it herself was faster, and she had to actively resist it, which was its own kind of work. She was better at it by week 3. By week 5, she was genuinely trusting Yirim to handle the daily validation reports without reviewing every number herself, and that trust was based on evidence rather than hope, which was the only kind of trust that held. Her Yim's formal title updated on a Thursday morning, and she didn't say anything about it for 2 days. Which Nadine only knew because the HR system reflected the change, and Yirim's reaction was nothing, no acknowledgement, no performance of gratitude. On the third day, she appeared at Nadine's desk with a printed sheet of paper. "I've been documenting the routing architecture," Yirim said. "The ways you explained it. I'm trying to write it clearly enough that someone who comes after me could understand it without you." She set the paper on the desk. "Can you tell me where I've gotten it wrong?" Nadine looked at the paper. It was good. Better than good, it was the specific kind of good that comes from someone who has actually understood a system rather than memorized its surface. She picked up a pen and circled 2 places. "Here," she said. "The exception handling order. You have the queue prioritized, but it's actually conditional on carrier type." She drew an arrow. "And here, this is right. But you need to add a note about the 2018 integration seam. Anyone reading this, in 5 years, needs to know it's there." Yirim looked at the corrections, made notes in her own handwriting along the margins. "Okay," she said. "It's good, Yirim," Nadine said. Yirim looked up. "Keep going," Nadine said. Yirim went back to her desk. Tayrok's outcome resolved itself in the 6th week. He received no criminal referral. The cooperation he had provided, the documentation, the account records, the communication logs, all of it delivered at 8:52 on the morning after his conversation with Mujin had been enough, combined with Choi's earlier cooperation, to build the case against Lim without needing to prosecute Tayrok alongside him. His extraction from the vendor contracts was treated as a civil matter. He repaid the amount that could be documented. His position at Haniel Crest was terminated with no severance beyond what his contract legally required. He was escorted out of the building on a Wednesday afternoon, not by security, not publicly. Just a quiet notification, a box that someone else packed, a building pass deactivated at 3:15. Nadine was on the 43rd floor in a compliance review meeting when it happened. She found out afterward from Yirim, who had seen it. She sat with the information for a moment. She did not feel triumphant. She examined herself for it, the vindication, the satisfaction she might have expected after everything, and what she found instead was something closer to fatigue and something else she didn't immediately have a name for. Not sorrow, not quite. More like the specific feeling of something long unresolved finally settling, and the settling being quieter than you thought it would be. She had not won against Tayrok. That framing didn't fit. What had happened was that the truth had become visible, and it had produced consequences, and those consequences were the consequences of his choices and not hers. She had not engineered any of it. She had done her work, kept her documentation, and told the truth when she was asked to tell it. That was all. Somehow, that was enough. She went home that evening and called her mother, who had been asking for weeks what was happening, and had been receiving versions of its complicated mama that were accurate but not satisfying. She told her mother most of it, not the parts that were under legal privilege, the parts that were hers to tell. Her mother was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, "Did you sign the contract?" "Yes," Nadine said. "Good," her mother said. "Now you're not doing it for them. You're doing it for yourself." Nadine sat in her kitchen with the phone against her ear and thought about that. "When did you get so straightforward?" she said. "I've always been straightforward," her mother said. "You were too tired to listen." Lim Byung-hwan's case moved into formal prosecution in the 8th week, which was faster than anyone had predicted and reflected. Mujin's attorney told him the quality of the evidence package the forensic team had assembled. Sujin's reconstruction of the secondary log transaction records had been particularly instrumental. The prosecutor would note, in the dry language of these things, that the secondary log had been identified through a technical audit conducted by the company's Director of Systems and Strategic Operations. Nadine's name was in the record. She did not find out about this until much later because nobody told her, and she did not read prosecutorial records as a habit. When she did find out, her response was to note it and continue working. The quarter turned. The hospital contracts processed. The compliance framework completed its first full review cycle under the new protocols, dual sign-off, independent review, mandatory training completion before credential assignment, and the review identified 3 configuration gaps that were corrected before they became anything other than gaps. The first time one of those corrections came from Yi Rim, who had identified a threshold calibration issue in the international carrier interface during a routine validation, documented it correctly, escalated it through the new protocol, and facilitated its correction before the end of the business day. Nadine received the final sign-off notification on her system and sat for a moment looking at Yi Rim's name in the approval chain. She did not say anything about it. She forwarded the notification to Mujin's direct reporting line with a single line of context. He responded 3 minutes later with noted. She understood that to mean, I see it. One evening in the 4th month, Mujin came down to the operations floor. He did not come to the operations floor often. When he did, the room registered it, the way rooms register him, a shift in atmospheric pressure, a collective recalibration. People did not stop working. They worked with a slightly different quality of attention, the way people do when they know they're being observed by someone whose opinion of their work has specific weight. He walked to Nadine's department. She was at her desk reviewing the quarterly system health report, which was 42 pages, and genuinely interesting to her in the way operational data was genuinely interesting, which was something she had decided some time ago was just a fact about who she was, and not something that required explanation or apology. She looked up. "Walk with me," he said. They walked to the windows at the far end of the floor, which looked north toward the harbor and the bridge lights and the dark water moving beneath them. He stood beside her and looked at it for a moment, without saying anything. She had learned in 4 months of working in direct relationship with this man that his silences were not empty. They were occupied. He was doing something in them. The hospital network's contract renewals, he said. 3 of the 5 renewed at higher contract values than the previous term. I know, she said. I saw the summaries. The 2 that didn't were the ones that requested additional compliance documentation in month 1. He paused. We expect those to renew in the next cycle. The framework, she said. Yes. She looked at the harbor. That took 4 months, she said. Not because the work was slow, because trust is slow. Yes, he said, a pause. Below them, through the floor, she could hear the faint, persistent hum of the server infrastructure. Her infrastructure. The thing she had built over 11 years and rebuilt over 4 months and was still building, because systems were never finished, only maintained and improved, and occasionally saved from the things that tried to hollow them from the inside. You could have gone anywhere, Mujin said. You said that before. I'm saying it again. She looked at him. He was looking at the harbor. His profile in the window light was the profile of a man who had also not taken an easy road, who had inherited something complicated and violent, and had spent years trying to separate himself from it, quietly and without announcement, making the decision every day that the legitimate future was worth the slow work of building it. She had not romanticized that. She had kept her eyes open about it. The distance he had come was real, and the distance still to travel was real, and she was not interested in pretending either of those things was otherwise. What she was interested in was the man who had knelt on the lobby floor to pick up her notebook, who had read 14 pages of her incident report twice. Who had told her, with the exact right words, that he had discovered how many people were standing on her shoulders while pretending she was beneath them. Coming back wasn't the same as going backward, she said. He looked at her. I know why I came back, she said. It wasn't because they needed me. It was because I wasn't done. I wasn't done with this system, and I wasn't done with. She stopped. Looked at the harbor. I had more to do here than I'd been allowed to do. And I wanted to do it. And now? He said. She thought about it honestly, the way she always thought about things. Now I'm doing it, she said. That's enough for tonight. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the harbor. They stood there for a while, the 2 of them, with the city lights and the dark water and the hum of the infrastructure below and the work ahead. The year turned. Haniel Crest's annual report, published 7 months after the billing crisis that had briefly frozen $40 million in claims, reflected the strongest operational performance in the company's recent history. billing accuracy up, compliance incidents down, hospital contract values increased across the network, staff training completion rates at 94%. The report's operational section did not read like a document produced by an organization that had recently survived an internal fraud investigation and the departure of its longtime operations executive. It read like a document produced by an organization that understood what it was doing and why. Mu Jin had read the draft before publication and made 3 edits. One of them was adding Nadine's name to the executive team listing in the front matter, which had been omitted from the first draft by the communications team through a process failure that Nadine said, when informed of it, was fine. She would flag it as a training example for the documentation process. He added her name back anyway. On a Saturday in spring, Nadine sat at her kitchen table with coffee, and Phyllis the succulent on the windowsill, and no particular obligation until afternoon. She was not working. She had some time ago developed the habit of not working on Saturday mornings as a deliberate act, not because she didn't want to, but because she had learned the hard way that the work expanded to fill whatever space she gave it, and she needed some space that was hers, that had nothing to do with routing tables and compliance protocols and the quarterly clearance rate. She read a novel instead, a physical book, paper pages, a story about people who had nothing to do with logistic infrastructure or corporate fraud or the particular exhaustion and satisfaction of building something real inside a flawed institution. Her phone was face down on the table. It had not demanded anything from her in 45 minutes, which was a minor achievement on a Saturday morning for someone in her position. She heard her apartment buzzer. She put the book face down on the table, marking her page with the particular care of someone who takes borrowed time seriously, and answered it. It was Mu Jin. She pressed the door release without saying anything, because she had been expecting this and not expecting it simultaneously for approximately 6 weeks, and she had decided to stop treating the uncertainty as something that needed to be resolved in advance. He came up. She had coffee. She did not make a production of either thing. He sat at her kitchen table, which was the kitchen table where the bills used to be, and where the book now was, and where Phyllis had lived since the day Nadine had carried her home in a cardboard box. He looked at Phyllis. "Is that a succulent?" he said. "Her name is Phyllis," Nadine said. He looked at it. "Why Phyllis?" "My mother's bridge club friend's named Phyllis," Nadine said. "I find it funny to name plants after my mother's bridge club friends." Mu Jin looked at the plant for a moment. Then he looked at Nadine. "There's a Yeon-hee at your office," he said. "Conference room plant," she said. "I named it last month." Something happened in his face then, not the almost smile. Something past it, something that committed to itself. He laughed. Not the brief controlled amusement she had heard in his office when she dropped her notebook on her first day back. A real laugh, the kind that doesn't perform anything because it doesn't need to. Nadine looked at him. She felt something she recognized from 4 months ago in the elevator, with the signed contract against her chest. The specific weight of something settling into place. "You came on a Saturday," she said. "Yes. Not about work." "No." She picked up her coffee, looked at him over the rim. "Okay," she said. He looked back. Okay, she said. "You can stay for a while." She picked up her book. He poured himself coffee from the pot on the counter with the ease of someone who has decided to be comfortable in a space and is committing to it. He sat back down. He produced his own phone and read something from it. They sat in her kitchen in the morning light and did not talk for 20 minutes, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who have been through enough, together, that quiet doesn't require filling, who have each, in their different ways, arrived at a version of themselves that doesn't need performance to occupy space. Nadine turned a page. Outside the window, Busan was doing what Busan does on spring mornings, moving, breathing, the harbor visible in the middle distance and the city sound coming through the glass at a register that was background rather than intrusion. Phyllis sat on the windowsill and did what succulents do, which is simply exist and not require much and endure longer than you expect. Months later, a newly hired analyst found Nadine at the end of a regular workday and asked the question, "I heard they fired you once." Nadine looked up from her screen. The analyst was 24, maybe 25, with the eager quality of someone who has not yet learned to hide the fact that they find the work genuinely interesting. That happened, Nadine said. And then they realized they couldn't replace you? Nadine looked past the analyst toward the floor, where Yi Rim was walking a junior employee through the carrier and fish race. In the same conversation Nadine had walked Yi Rim through months ago, patient and thorough, pausing when the junior employee looked uncertain, not moving forward until the understanding was real rather than performed. They replaced my position, Nadine said. She watched Yi Rim point at the screen, watched the junior employee nod slowly, and then, after a moment, nod again with different confidence. They couldn't replace what I knew. The analyst thought about this, nodded, walked away. Nadine watched the floor for another moment. The billing system humming underneath everything, invisible and operational, doing what it was built to do. She turned back to her screen. She had a configuration review in the morning, and a compliance training session in the afternoon, and a conversation with Mujin at 7 about the hospital contract cycle, and she needed to finish annotating the Q2 system health report before she went home. She was not doing any of it to prove she deserved to be here. She was doing it because this was her work, and she was good at it, and she had decided, not in a single moment of dramatic clarity, but in the accumulated weight of many smaller moments, across a year of building and fighting and losing and not losing, that being good at something you care about in a place that knows your value is not a small life. It is, in fact, the only life worth having. She clicked into the first annotation. Her coffee was still warm. Outside, Busan Harbor moved in the late light, and the ships went where they were going, and the city held its ordinary, complicated, ongoing life. And inside the operations floor of Handul Crest Holdings, the woman they had once carried out in a cardboard box ran the most trusted division in the company and did not spend any time thinking about the people who had laughed. She had better things to do. Fade out.